This is a meeting of the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee. It is November 8th, 2023. My name is Victor Normand. I am the chair. I'll now call the roll. Alan Minoyan.
Present.
Janice Livingston.
Here.
Robert Pontbriand.
Here.
Rich Maori.
Here.
Tim Bregan. Brian Sawyer. Rico Capucci. Michael McGovern.
Here.
Bill Marshall. Neil Angus.
Here.
John Cater.
Here.
We have a quorum. We are in order. We have received meeting minutes from our last meeting yesterday. It's not on the agenda. Is the board comfortable in reviewing those minutes?
I am. Everyone else is.
All right, without objection, any comments, questions?
Mr. Chair,
Robert?
I did receive a couple of edits from members for the record. Selectman Livingston pointed out that the meeting was called to order at 3 p.m., not 4 p.m. as sent in the draft. There was a typo on page 4. "We" was capitalized, and then received one small substantive edit from Neil Angus from the deck on page, where lost my place.
You could ask
It
Neil.
was on page 5, Robert, I believe. Just make Delorier's name spelling
Right.
correction, and then there was one other amendment on page 4, I believe it was.
Yes, on page 4, about almost halfway down the page, where Neil Angus stated that the issue of jurisdiction for Devens is unique. Neil submitted an amendment to add, unlike villages or neighborhood sections within AIR that are all within the jurisdiction of AIR, the Devens portion of AIR is part of the Devens Regional Enterprise Zone and under separate jurisdiction. That's what you submitted, Neil, right?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
And so that's being added for page 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have one additional on the very last page. It was the land availability study, not affordability study.
Got it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Land availability.
That's right. I saw that.
Okay, any other comments, corrections?
I'm,
Motion to approve?
yeah. I'm
Second.
Janice,
Yep.
second by Rich. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Without objection, the minutes are approved unanimously. Okay, town reports, Town of Air.
I don't think we have anything. Do you? Robert?
Hi, Bill Marshall.
Hi, Bill.
Yep.
Well,
So,
I can, I'll just say this. We had our most recent, our last Air Devens Resolution Committee, our Citizens Committee meeting a couple weeks ago. And just, so you know, we began reviewing the industrial properties that are in what was traditionally known as the Devens Industrial Park, off of Independence Drive and Cook Drive. So our committee, we started, doing a deeper dive into each of those properties out there, understanding, who was out there, what they're doing in these buildings. And so that was a very good exercise. Our committee went through at our last meeting. And then just sort of, looking a little bit into the split tax rate issue between Air and Devens. So we had a very good last meeting. Just again, our committee really having just more authoritative knowledge and understanding of the properties, the buildings, et cetera, that are on the historic Air portions of the land. So it was actually a very good meeting, and we'll continue, with that process.
Okay.
Yes.
Town of Harvard, before I give my report, I'll acknowledge that Kristen Cullen has joined the meeting. She's a representative of Devens businesses. Welcome, Kristen. Good to see you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, Town of Harvard, we had our meeting earlier this week, actually. Just two items that we discussed. A continuation of the land availability study. Neil Angus joined our meeting. We had indicated at the last meeting that there was about 115 acres of land that remained available for sale, commercial land by mass development, and there's at least 2 parcels that were on that list that are not on the list. So now we're actually down below 100 acres, and we're still waiting for an update from mass development on that list. We also, at that meeting, we also talked about using open space land for a municipal purpose, and that was a topic that's come up. I think we discussed it briefly at our last meeting. Talking about making a request of mass development to set aside land for a municipal purpose, so that we didn't get to the point where all the available land was gone and a need was identified for a municipal purpose, like a school, for instance, at some point in the future. And along those lines, we also discussed a new topic, and that is the education contract between the town of Ayer and mass development. In terms of what would be the trigger in terms of residential development and additional school children that would cause the Harvard School District to reconsider that contract, whether it's additional housing in Harvard or additional housing at Devens. Susan Mary Redinger, who's on our committee, who formerly served on the school committee, brought us some information that the school board had used in the past for evaluating that subject. And it turns out it's a very inexact science, not knowing exactly how many children are going to appear with respect to any given housing development. Anyway, so we discussed that, and we're looking forward to an update of that land availability study and also mass development budget for the next fiscal year, which we believe should be presented to their board this month, and they're committed to giving all of us a copy of that budget. So we'll be able to see what kind of trends are developing financially. Okay, Town of Shirley.
There's no update at this point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Devens representative John or Tristan.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good to hear everybody. Sorry I couldn't log on. I'm having some IT issues. No major updates from Devens. We are actually holding our first Devens residents meeting in person this Saturday at the Eisenberg Center. And we are pleased to see that there's a significant amount of the Devens residents that will be attending. The topic will be completely focused on jurisdiction, talking about the 4 options, and getting feedback from the residents about kind of where they are, what their top questions and top issues are in terms of jurisdiction. So we're looking forward to that. But that's all I have for right now.
Okay, thank you, John. Neil, Devens Enterprise Commission.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just following up, as you mentioned, Victor, I did attend the Harvard Jurisdiction Framework Committee meeting, and we, under the discussion about open space being able to be used for, future municipal use like a school site, we also did discuss residentially zoned land as a potential, in addition to commercial zone land like Vicksburg Square or stuff like that could be used for school sites. So I just wanted to clarify that. There's only 18 housing units left under the 282 unit cap, and there's a lot of additional residential land over and beyond that could accommodate more than 18 units. So, just pointing out that there is other available land beyond the commercial properties for municipal type uses, such as a school or any other type of municipal use. We also, since the last meeting, worked closely with Victor, Michael McGovern, and John Catter to update the RFEI, which is another agenda topic, so I'm sure we'll get onto that, so I won't go into detail on that. We'll leave it for that topic discussion. That's all I have at this point, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Neil, you mentioned 18 units. That is above and beyond the Emerson Green project?
Correct. Correct, yeah.
Okay. What's the status of the 40 units of multifamily within the Emerson Green project?
So it is now 46 units. We did add 6 units a couple of years back, year or two ago, I believe it was. Actually, it was last year, 2022. 46 units. The status is the developer is still working on securing financing, working closely with Mass Development and potential lender to secure the final financing to move forward on that project.
Are there any limitations when their right to develop may expire?
No, they already did start construction on the project. The foundation hole is dug. It's ready to go. So the project has actually started. The only restriction would be if they don't start, within the next few months. I believe they might be looking at a new building code, so they might have to update their plans to ensure they're meeting the current building code.
Okay. Okay, moving right along. The next item is the Mass Development update. I have not received any communications from Mass Development. Is anybody? Okay, next item, the RFEI. As Neil indicated, we did meet to review the document at the direction of this committee, and the essential thing we did was to take out any references to Super Town Meeting, but we also made some other minor edits to the document. So Neil was a principal scribe at that meeting. Neil, could you go over some of those edits? Do you have the document in front of you?
Bear with me 1 second. I'm just pulling up that document.
So what you all have received is a clean copy of the final draft RFEI, and a few edits that were made to it that Neil is tracking down right now. So while Neil's doing that, I'll just say that what we hope to do is hopefully the committee will be satisfied with the draft and we'll be able to finalize that document. Then the next step is to get it out onto the street. Now, what you also have is a brief transmittal that will go on top of the document. And the transmittal is really intended just to refocus the developers so that what we're really looking for is their overall sense of the project as it relates primarily to the cost. And remember that the purpose of the RFEI initially was to answer the question, how much money are we talking about for consultants? And so we just want to refocus the consultants. So we're not asking them to resolve any of the issues or expand on the document necessarily, but rather to take it into consideration, give this committee some idea of what the cost of providing consultant services.
Yeah, Victor, and I think that's a good point, to point out, we had batted around the issue that nobody had really defined consensus yet. I know it had been defined in a draft MOU or MOA with Mass Development, but that was never finalized. So we were trying to figure out, okay, well, what does consensus mean? And like at this point in the process, we don't need to define consensus. We could have, the consultant help refine and define that term as part of any additional process going forward. So we just took out, any issue with regard to what does consensus mean. We'll figure that out as we go. So I do have the draft. Basically, we did a few minor edits to the draft FEIR that was dated May 10th. We added in that Devens was established as an economic target area, an economic opportunity area to attract redevelopment. Just an introductory paragraph to make sure respondents understand the economic investment that was made for Devens to get to where it is today. We took out reference to Mass Development issuing this RFEI. It's the Devens Jurisdictional Framework Committee that's issuing this RFEI, since Mass Development is not at the table. Other edits we made were defining key performance indicators, adding regional services, social services, and cultural amenities to the list of specific municipal services and activities that should be considered as part of this. The discussion that evolved from our discussion about, there's a big focus on fiscal analysis of Devens, but we have to look at this more holistically, so including those regional services, social services, and cultural amenities that are unique to Devens as well. Highlighting the issue to maintain or improve on current levels of service in Devens were added. It was in there, we just emphasized it a little more. And on the page under task force scenario development, we had a proposed approach to provision of municipal services, and we included a few additional municipal services included to that list, including land use permitting, regional services, social services, and cultural amenities. Again, showing that the diversity of services within the Devens Regional Enterprise Zone. We also added to the financial implications bullet right after that, we added staffing needs to the list of municipal services, just taking into account, what the staffing needs would be to maintain the existing current levels of service in Devens. Those were and the biggest one we did, as I think Victor mentioned, we did take out any reference to Supertown meeting in this under task 9. Supertown meeting is mentioned. We just talked about a recommended scenario for public meetings in general. Throughout this RFEI process and RFI process, we'll figure out what the appropriate avenue is for whether it involves Supertown meeting, and if it does, who are parties to that Supertown meeting? Does Devens get its own vote, or are they just part of the underlying communities? That has yet to be determined. Doesn't need to be determined as part of this process, but it needs to be determined as part of the next steps once a consultant is selected. That's a summary of the updates to the RFEI, and I think everybody was in agreement that these were, minor additions, but for clarification purposes, should go a long way to help attract, a reputable consultant to do this. Victor also did work on a draft cover letter for this as well, too, to kind of explain the whole process, where this is coming from. Victor, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I did mention that, Neil, while you were on the hunt for your edits, but I have to talk about that a bit further. Let's just focus on the RFEI right now. Are there any additional comments or changes from the committee?
I think it looks good.
Robert?
Mr. Chairman, I think it looks good as well, and kudos to the subgroup for working on it. Just one minor question on page 5, the second bullet that says Devens Municipal Services Overview, and I don't disagree with this section, but it says Mass Development and the DEC will make their department heads available. Not trying to split hairs, but
Yeah.
how can do we need to modify that Mass Development piece, since none of us have any authority over that and they're not at the table?
Right. We did discuss that.
Okay.
And I think that our approach was, again, the purpose of this document is to get some kind of an overall cost estimate. And when we get to the point where we're actually issuing an RFP, I think there's no question mass development has got to be on board at that point.
Agreed. Okay.
So I think that's why we made the assumption that they will provide, and the deck, of course, will provide staff for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I agree. Other than that, I think it looks good.
And Robert, there is also a couple of references to the DJFC memorandum of agreement, and that's where I had talked about that was a memorandum, a draft memorandum between the DJFC and Mass Development. That still has yet to be finalized as well, too. So we discussed that as part of this as well, and we left it in for the same reasons Victor just mentioned.
Okay. What is the pleasure of the committee?
I think we need to get it going, get it out. I'm all for approving it today and getting it out there.
Is that in the form of a motion?
I make a motion that the committee approve the RFEI and release it.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Rich? Before I call the roll, any final comments? Okay, on the motion to approve the RFEI, Alan Minoyan,
Yes.
Janice Livingston.
Yes.
Robert Pontbriand.
Yes.
Rich Maori.
Yes.
Michael McGovern.
Yes.
Neil Angus.
Yes.
Say yes, Neil. Good. John Cater.
Yes.
Kristen Cullen.
Yes.
Okay, we have it.
And Bill Marshall. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Bill Marshall, I think, is
Oh.
one.
Yes.
Oh, Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't see you check in. Are you prepared to vote, Bill?
Yes.
He did.
Okay, very good, I'm sorry. Okay, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. We now have an RFEI that is no longer a draft. Now, as to its distribution, Mike and Alan, you got pulled into this a bit, but Mike, and you were going to talk about a bit. What are the logistics for getting this out on the street? And
So we have to follow 30B. So I had suggested, and I reached out to Robert, that we can work together to get this out on the street. You have to be MCPPO certified. I'm sure I don't know, you are as well, I am. So we'll work together to get this posted to the process. There's a number of steps that we have to follow through the central register and advertising in the newspaper and that type of thing. And so we'll bundle it all up. It probably will take about a month. It's kind of a lengthy, convoluted process, unfortunately, but it'll take about a month, and then you'll have a period of about another month where people can, or companies can submit their information, and then we'll eventually open the proposals. We'll have to have a committee that reviews the proposals as well, but that's down the road here. We don't need to do that today or anything like that.
So then a deadline date might be something like end of January?
Yeah, realistically, for any type of RFP or RFQ or anything like that, really from start to end, you're looking at about anywhere from 2 to 3 months. So.
okay, very good. So when you do publish, you'll be sure to
So what I can do is I can type up tasks that we have to follow and that we have to do, and I'll send it around to the group so you'll see exactly what the steps are. That's not a problem.
Okay, and then within the next 3 months, we'll form a review committee.
You probably within a little bit sooner than that. You want to have everybody ready to go.
I've made a note for the next meeting agenda.
Put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay, prior to that, if anyone has an interest in serving on a review, now we have to be, how formal does this committee have to be? Is their review a public process?
I will have to check on that. So I'll have to, there's different criteria for different pieces of
Work
30B.
up our criteria sometime.
Yeah, it's different for either an, invitation for bid or RFQ. There's all different levels. So, but I will put that together for the group and send it out. So.
Okay, very good. That's an agenda item for our next meeting. Okay, moving right along. Vicksburg Square governance and zoning, a continuation of the discussion we were having at the last meeting. I think that the discussion really stemmed from the fact that there's a strong desire to get some action with respect to Vicksburg Square to fend off any legislative changes to Chapter 498 that don't involve the towns or Devens residents. And so Janice put forth a proposal that we need to discuss further at this meeting. And then, Janice, do you want to just summarize what your proposal was?
Well, the proposal is because of so when you look at the historical property lines, okay, Vicksburg Square falls in the middle of two towns and two counties. So I had made the proposal of, which I had mentioned in numerous open meetings, but I finally kind of like, okay, let's put it out there, of, there's an echo somewhere.
Marshall's got
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah, that's me. I just joined by, so I'm going to hang up the phone.
Okay.
So that that AIR would take governance over the historical property line that Vicksburg Square is on, and that AIR would then work with Harvard as far as finding something equitable in trade. Now, obviously, that's not something that can happen overnight anyways, because as I've stated, you've got a county line and you've got town lines. So there's a lot of steps that would need to be taken, but I do think it is something that should at least be looked into, because it can be looked into while other things are going on also. And so my proposal, and I will add this today, is that the AIR's local committee, when they're meeting, that they're looking at the map of Devens and looking to see what they see as an equitable trade for Harvard. Now, obviously, Harvard would have to say yes or no. But, to kind of look it over, because there might be a spot where it's very clear, it's like, oh, that's a good spot right there. Harvard should take that piece, and then we've got this piece, and everybody's happy. So that's kind of the proposal to be worked on, because the bottom line is we need to do something about Vicksburg Square. Also, because of the housing, I also want to remind everybody that today, and I don't know the update yet, but today the state we're set to vote on $250 million in funding for emergency shelter crisis response. Now, that obviously we have an issue. We need housing, and we want all of us to take care of the Vicksburg Square, and not the state coming in and saying, well, we're just taking it. And so that's the other thing, because if the state comes in and says, well, we're just going to take it and we're going to do what we want, we may not have a say. Okay? And again, when I say the we, I mean we. So we kind of want to head that off.
Okay. So along those lines, I think that something needs to happen to Vicksburg Square on many levels, not the least of which is the need for housing, but also the need to retain, as Janice said, local control over that development, as was envisioned in the reuse plan. A couple of meetings ago, we talked about the towns actually putting forth an amendment to 498, and that was not well received because it was seen as perhaps opening the floodgates, and just any number of amendments outside of the region could be made to affect not just housing, but anything that happens at Devens. So we came full circle back to using super town meeting to make this change, and that is the vehicle that exists for making a zone change. So in the big picture, which as Janice says, really needs to be refined is that we would use super town meeting to do three things. The first would be to establish that Vicksburg Square, in its entirety, all 20 acres of it, will be in the town of Air, notwithstanding final jurisdiction, that process continues on. Second action will be to zone change, limited to the 20 acres, that's Vicksburg Square, so that it becomes available for residential use. And the third change is, for lack of a better expression, a distribution of the units or the residential use for Vicksburg Square. So what we need to do is refine this and move forward. And I think that relates to the issue of legislative changes to 498. If this is in motion, that becomes, I believe, our local defense and against any outside organizations or legislators or the administration, for that matter, of making changes at Devens. So along those lines, it seems to me we need to do two things. We need to begin to kind of outline what would be required in that super town meeting. And then I think we need to do some research, and maybe there's somebody here, and if Neil were up on the screen, I'd be able to say he might be the one to know exactly how we, meaning the towns, initiate a super town meeting. In the past, to my knowledge, every other super town meeting has been initiated by Mass Development. But Neil, is it required that Mass Development initiate super town meeting?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Do you know what the process is?
I don't off the top of my head, but I can certainly look into it.
Okay, can I make that assignment to you, that you would just kind of lay that out for us? What the notifications that are required? I know that clerks in the towns have to be notified, and somehow a date has to be established, but could you work on an outline of the steps required to set up a super town meeting?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay. Janice?
I would note too, though, that I understand, the steps you were talking about, Victor. I'm not sure they're all necessary in order to figure out the future of Vicksburg Square, changing town boundaries and so forth. I mean, there are other avenues or other ways to do it too, but I wasn't quite certain of what you meant by we'd have to do a super town meeting and then figure out the district or change the district boundaries and then the distribution of units. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, when Mass Development was putting together the last super town meeting, which they never moved forward on, they held hearings, and at the hearings they made they changed their approach to developing housing. For instance, they said they capped affordable housing at 25%. So I think those are the kinds of things that, in terms of distribution, that it would be some type of housing, whether it's rental housing or for sale housing or age-restricted housing, whatever it would be spelled out, as well as an affordable component to it would be spelled out in the super town meeting, so that, again, there remains local control in terms of what gets developed there.
Okay, I understand now. I was thinking when you said distribution of units, I'm thinking, okay, we're going to change the boundaries and then give some to Air, some to Harbor.
No, it's not
the type of units, though,
basically
the mix of housing types or apartment types, whatever.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
The whole purpose of going...
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, John?
Can I have to make a point?
Yes.
I think it's important to bring some of the stakeholders who were, if this is the appropriate time, some of the stakeholders who were not on the call with the legislators where this was explicitly discussed, I think the DEC and the representative from Commonwealth Fusion Systems, I think, I want to be sure that I'm articulating this right, we might be conflating Vicksburg Square and jurisdiction. They're two separate tracks. And as I understood the conversation with the legislators, they felt strongly that jurisdiction and Vicksburg Square, especially changing of county lines, should be separate paths that we can do at the same time. Make no mistake, the housing challenge should be addressed quickly, and it can be with Vicksburg Square as well as other parcels, but I think maybe it would be a good time to brief the stakeholders that weren't there about the discussions with the legislators and to be sure that for the next conversation, the DEC's invited and perhaps the other stakeholders. I think that's probably where some of the questions are coming up.
Okay, Janice?
So to kind of clarify, I mean, as far as what we're talking about in jurisdiction is that because of the super town meeting process, there are people like, well, you know, Vicksburg Square is in two historical lines, and if everything comes back, how are we going to solve it? And that's why you're kind of solving it. So let me just give an example, okay? This is an example, okay? To just kind of hopefully help facilitate this conversation. Harvard and Air are doing what used to be called a gentleman's agreement. That at the end of the day, that if everything goes back to the towns, that will be, Vicksburg Square will be all in Air, and then whatever you're getting, okay? So it's not like written in stone, because it doesn't need to be, but we're able to tell everybody, no, we've got it all worked out, we've kind of got like a little memorandum. And so, but if it, you know, depending on the disposition, the final disposition in about 10 years, okay? That solves kind of the immediate conversation, because if disposition is to go back to the towns, then everybody's happy as far as that goes, okay? So that's kind of what this is that we've got to kind of facilitate that conversation while moving forward with other things. So there's a lot of things, and Peter had mentioned it in July at his last meeting, how you got to have, you know, you're taking care of the jurisdiction issue, you're taking care of the zoning issue, you're taking care of this. So the state, as far as the state concerns, they don't need it. But as far as the towns are concerned, they need it. And therein lies, that's why there's kind of that communication gap between the state and the towns as far as that goes.
Right. I think it's really clear that at the end of the day, it's the legislature that's going to make the decision on permanent government and jurisdiction at Devens. But I think that, with this, by making this statement that there is an expectation that Vicksburg Square will be in the town of Air, I think it is a strong statement, and I think it, as much as it can be relied on, knowing that the legislature is going to make the final decision, I think it needs to be there. And I think a similar, in my mind, a similar way to look at this is that, is there any, even though Keedy Way is in the Devens Enterprise Zone, and there's nothing that says Keedy Way will one day be in the town of Shirley, is there any doubt that Keedy Way will be in the town of Shirley? The town hall, the police department, library, they're in the enterprise zone right now, and but nonetheless, I think there is an expectation, and I think by putting Vicksburg Square out there in this fashion, we go as far as we can go in creating an expectation that Vicksburg Square will be in the town of Air.
Mr. Chair, just to add to that, Selectman Livingston had mentioned at the last meeting as well that there's also hopes, perhaps through this action at this level, that we would get Mass Development antenna back up and get them back at the table, because they obviously, my own observation over the last 13 years, have no real impetus to do anything at Vicksburg Square to date. But now if at this level, at least gears are turning, things are moving, maybe that would be an impetus. Janice had mentioned this, which I thought was a good point at the last meeting, to get them to the table.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad he brought that up because I lost my point on that one. You're right, because I don't think Mass Development wants to attend these meetings where we're all just, it's important, but for them, they don't have a stake in it. But the moment we say, hey, we got a plan and we think everybody's on board, but we need you, you have to be at this meeting. Here's the synopsis, as to why. And if they don't show up, then we knock on their door. We literally show up at their door and say, no, you can't ignore us. Okay? Because we need to talk to you. You need to be a part of this. But I think that they won't come forward unless we've actually got an action.
Yeah, that's a point well taken. I agree. So I think what we need to do in anticipation of our next meeting is to begin to put a list together of the issues that relate to what an article at Super Town Meeting might look like. Is there?
But Victor,
Neil,
are we not putting the cart before the horse in terms of what this is the Devens Jurisdictional Framework Committee, and we're talking about the future of Devens, all of Devens, and it sounds like you're trying to parse off Vicksburg Square and do a disposition for Vicksburg Square at the same time we're doing a disposition for the whole Devens Regional Enterprise Zone, right?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is John. That's my concern as well.
yeah, and I think that is the plan of action that's been put forward.
But at the same time, and I think, I'm hoping this will reassure, whatever the report looks like, which will report on the facts. So right now, we're talking about Vicksburg Square and just that area. So the report, the consultant comes in, they're going to look over, and their task is going to be, what is the best for the whole? And if at the end of the day, the best for the whole is that Devens even becomes its own community, then it doesn't matter, because it becomes its own community, and this whole thing, as far as jurisdiction, didn't matter. But what we did work on together is getting Vicksburg Square up and running in a healthy way. And I hope I said that right. I hope I said that right. Yeah.
Well, no, that's okay. I completely understand where you're coming from. There's no doubt that and I'm not going to speak to the legislators, but what I heard from the senators was that redrawing of county lines, addressing jurisdiction, needs to be done separately than Vicksburg Square, separately. And because there's money available now for Vicksburg Square, and if we were to slow down the process by co-joining the two, it may not be to the benefit. There's no doubt that Vicksburg Square could play and should play a role in ameliorating a little bit of the housing issue. But the concern was just slowing that down. And to Neil's point, is a jurisdictional committee, and we're kind of talking about Vicksburg Square, two separate issues. And the question remains, should it even be part of this agenda?
That is a valid point. But I think this committee is focused on permanent government at Devens, and we have seen examples within the past year of the Commonwealth inserting itself in what happens at Devens that might not be something we approve locally. And I don't think that we are preempting anything. I think, as I said, I think clearly permanent government at Devens, changing county lines, that's something that the legislature does and not local communities. What we in effect will be doing, if we proceed with this and we are successful and have a super town meeting and this plan is approved by super town meeting, it will inform the legislature with respect to one aspect of permanent government at Devens. There's no getting around that. I think, Neil and John, what you're suggesting is that we basically slow down and let things go along as they have been. And I think, as Janice has said, that's not going to get Mass Development's attention. And they'll just... Neil?
Yeah, Victor, I'm not suggesting slow down. I'm suggesting, as we've said from the beginning, we can do both processes in tandem. It's just discussing, the what's happening with Vicksburg Square is that we're talking about making it a separate item from the Jurisdiction Framework Committee's tasks. So, talking about it in parallel, still going forward with all these questions, answering what does it mean, for Vicksburg. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to mean changing town boundaries. We could do it other ways, but if changing town boundaries is the best way to do it and everybody's in agreement, then great. But that's a different track, versus the whole disposition of Devens. So we can do them in parallel. We just should separate the two tasks from Devens jurisdictional framework to a Vicksburg discussion, That's all I'm suggesting.
I understand.
John, I would concur with you.
Okay. And I think the problem that's been talked about in the past is if you don't deal with the jurisdiction issue with respect to Vicksburg Square and you try to rezone Vicksburg Square for housing, without that component, you will not get the support of all three towns. That's been demonstrated in the past. There are too many uncertainties. But by adding the component where you place all of Vicksburg Square as one parcel in the town of Air, you answer many of the questions and are much more likely, in my view, to get approval at super town meeting.
And I don't dispute that either, Victor. I'm just saying it's a separate discussion from the disposition of the Devens Regional Enterprise Zone.
Well, and that's what
Just let's do them in tandem. Just let's separate out the discussions from the DJFC.
And that's what I'm suggesting now, is that we have a subgroup of this committee to start working on all the issues that relate to such a super town meeting. Rich?
Yeah, I think we're all saying the same thing. What I'm hearing is concern about process and whether or not discussing Vicksburg Square separately is part of the overall jurisdiction. I would argue it is, and I think we could certainly set up a subcommittee that's sole task is to focus on Vicksburg Square and address some of the issues in terms of boundary, in terms of schools, in terms of all the municipality, all the granular questions we need to get to, and then come back to this group with insights and then recommendations. The two work together, but if there's a concern that this is going to take us off our bigger task, which is around overall jurisdiction, I don't see it. We're not really doing anything. And we had 10 years to do it, and the state's clearly said we're not really going to engage. So if we're not focusing on Vicksburg Square, what else are we doing? We're having these were quarterly meetings where we really didn't have much to say. So I think we have to address Vicksburg Square now for all the reasons we've talked about. And the call last week, John, to your point about updating others, the calls with Senator Jamie Eldridge, Senator John Cronin, and Representative Dan Senna to share with them our this very high level idea of could we surgically address Vicksburg Square now, and what would be their response and the response of the state. And they were all very enthusiastic about it. I think Senator Cronin wanted to understand kind of the housing cap and how that would be lifted and in a way that doesn't open it all up. And to the point that they sent out a letter today to Secretary Howe, who's the Secretary of Economic Development and the boss of Mass Development, requesting the $400,000 that Senator Eldridge was able to earmark last year. So I think we're all in agreement that we keep moving forward, big picture, but this is in front of us and something we can do now.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
But I think respectfully, not agree that we're all in agreement on this point. I think the funding of the study is critical, and it's fantastic that letter's going out. But I do think that we do have some other things to work through before we have some level of agreement on this point.
Is your goal, Victor, about having this super town meeting and having the article be, do we want to put Vicksburg Square into air? Is it just to show the legislature that we're all in agreement on that, or?
I think that's a byproduct of it, but I think more importantly, it just shows whether it's the developers or future residents of Vicksburg Square, exactly what the likely jurisdiction of Vicksburg Square is going to be, so that it's not completely up in the air. It will demonstrate that developer knows, that, again, given the type of housing there to be developed, where it will be located, and people who live there will know exactly from what town they're in. And I think we're seeing some examples of the confusion that existed. I mean, at our last meeting, somebody from Devens, I'm not sure if the person that's here now, said, well, when they bought their house, they just assumed that Devens was its own town. You know, I think having been in the real estate business, I know exactly how that came about. And you know, I think that's to be avoided. And I think, especially given the size of Vicksburg Square, I think we just want it really known that that is the likely form of permanent government for Vicksburg Square. Now, what happens in the meantime, if we do get Mass Development engaged in the process, and if things move in a different direction before a developer is selected, you know, then, you know, that may be a different story. But I think it's really to make a point, to try to get Super Town Meeting to approve a zone change for Vicksburg Square. I think we need to deal with the questions that have been raised in the past. Alan?
What? Okay. Oh, I don't know if, was someone else going?
Who's got it?
Just an observation, I'm processing all the, and listening, and I'll just say, I had the benefit of, I was up on Devens yesterday, I was just doing some, and I walked, which I have never done, I've walked around the entirety of Vicksburg Square, truly and really, so, and you know, and I'll just say, you know, Vicksburg Square is very unique and distinct from the rest of the redevelopment activities and plan, you know, on Devens. Urgency. The building was constructed between 1928 and 1929. It's almost 100 years old. It's been empty, now vacant, and when historic buildings that are empty, they deteriorate at an accelerated rate, and the deterioration is actually accelerating. We're very serious in AIR and beyond about the preservation and reuse and repurposing of irreplaceable historic assets and cultural assets like this. People talk that stuff and it all sounds good. We believe it and live it, because anyone in the development game and community development game knows when you preserve and save those special historic buildings, it's not just the building itself, it's what it contributes to the entire sort of energy of the community, and that we can do these things and accomplish them. And buildings like that will never, ever be constructed again, ever. You can't. There's an urgency. And I've had the benefit also, we have the Turners Public Spirit now. If you go to the Air Library website, we have the whole thing going back to 1869 online. And I've been spending far too much time the last 2 weeks of going through between 1994 and 2006. And it's amazing saga of Devens. Massive articles. When this all Devens redevelopment reuse plan started, Vicksburg Square was the priority redevelopment. I can provide you with the articles from back then. That was the priority. So somehow over the past 20 years, it ceased to be the priority redevelopment. I know because it's greenfield redevelopment is fun, and it's pretty straightforward and really not terribly complicated when all is said and done. When you go and start redeveloping historic properties of that scale, it's tough stuff. It is. It's really difficult and complex, and you need a lot of partners in it. I don't think Mass Development, their expertise, what they've been done for the last 30 years is repurposing and restoring, preserving the historic properties. The residential stuff, yes. The small, officers' quarters and non-commissioned officers' quarters. The other urgent need with this is, which we have to live with every day in our living towns, our living communities. We have a housing crisis. We have folks that aren't able to rent their apartments in area and are being literally, Alicia and I met with 3 of them this week in my office. They can't live here anymore because there is nowhere for them to live because we don't have the supply, the stock of housing that could stabilize these prices. So for both these reasons, there's an urgency. And I'll say this, I walked the north side of one of the quad buildings of Vicksburg Square, the north side of it, the one on the air side. We need to communicate with Mass Development immediately, or they need to cut down and remove the massive ivy that is literally tearing the brickwork apart of the entire building in the back. They've abandoned it in terms of removing the ivy. It's just a mess. The stairways are covered with half a foot thick of moss. And when I see that, that tells me, keep deteriorating. We need to save these buildings and maintain them.
But isn't that
And
also
start the effort of,
state's historical?
Yes.
There, which when we were on the phone call, I pointed out, somebody needs to call them and
Yes.
have them, we've paid them money to protect that building.
Yes.
They need to show up.
And I can provide the committee with the photographs. I took it because I was really kind of shocked at the state of that. So it's a side you don't see unless you walk back there and look at it. You really can't see it. So there's an urgency. That's just my point with everything I just said. For the preservation, and it is an irreplaceable heritage asset for our towns and communities. The people that were there sacrificed their lives for our national defense, and this is literally what built air. That's an important part of our culture and living legacy and heritage, and we need to preserve it, for our communities. It's important. And we need the housing for our people. We have a housing crisis today, so thank you for indulging me.
No disagreement. So it comes down to 2 choices in my view. One is to go forward with the proposal that Janice has made, and the other is to keep meeting and really not moving the ball down the field. And I don't think we have a lot of time. I have the impression, after talking to Jamie Eldridge, who has had conversations with Senator Cronin, that we've got 2024 to show some real action, or else it's going to be taken out of our hands. So what are we going to do? Janice's proposal may be too complicated to ever make happen. I don't know. But I think we need to start putting down in front of us those aspects of what a super town meeting article might look like. It's doing something.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this is John. I do think we probably need to talk about it more. There's no argument that Vicksburg Square needs to be addressed, but at the same time, attaching jurisdiction to that discussion slows it down. And it's not only the opportunity to get funds for Vicksburg Square that the senators were talking about it to perhaps other parcels as well, because Vicksburg Square's renovation timeline is quite longer than perhaps other parcels, either in Devens or in other parts. So Alan's point is incredibly well taken. That's my first duty station. Alan was Vicksburg
Yes,
Square.
quite right, John, yes.
And
So John, tell me how moving towards a super town meeting slows down the redevelopment of Vicksburg Square, as you've said.
I don't know the answer to that right now. I think we just probably need to have a few more discussions on the points that we talked about
I think we
before we put consensus.
I think we have a lot more to talk about. Yeah, you mentioned you have a meeting coming up of your committee that deals with jurisdiction. I think you should bring this up to them and bring back to us some feedback from them.
No, I'm sure it'll be on the agenda. There's no doubt about it.
And
I mean, it's
Neil?
opportunity to pulse of
Yeah.
what people are, and it's not our task to tell them what to think. It's to tell them these are the issues you need to start thinking about. So for sure.
And Bill Marshall and Neil, I think the same thing with the deck. Give us some feedback. And again, I think we need to start putting some of the, the boundary line is the first one that comes up. That's got to be dealt with. But then what are the complications? Everything from who's going to educate the kids who live there before permanent government is established. How's that going to work? How are we going to geographically connect Vicksburg Square somehow to the town of Air? What are the options for doing that?
I think you probably reach out to the legislators and find out what the process is for changing the boundary. It is their jurisdiction. I think that you probably want to have a discussion with Senator Eldridge and Senator Cronin, and obviously the representatives as well, and find out how realistic that is, to be quite honest with you. Now you're getting into changing boundaries, gerrymandering around one building, and while Senator Eldridge and Cronin and Rep. Senna and Harrington, who's the...
No, Harrington.
No, she left.
You got
Senna.
I think Senator Rep. is fine.
we have Senna. You have, everybody else has Senna too? Okay, all right, so there you go. Right, they may be in agreement, but the reality is that, representatives and senators from Boston, the South Shore and everything may not want to touch us with a 10-foot pole with getting into redrawing city and town lines. And I think that's probably the first place you want to start and have that discussion.
And that, you're right, that's a discussion that if anything other than restoring jurisdiction to the three towns is going to involve boundaries. If Devens becomes a town, that's certainly going to involve which county is Devens going to be in, and so it's complicated. And again, I think super town meeting is not going to be definitive, but it will be clearly a sense of where jurisdiction at Devens is going with respect to Vicksburg Square. And that, you're right, that's the kind of thing I think that needs to be on our list of things to talk about.
I think it's a lot easier for the legislature to take a look at if Devens, that's the option of becoming its own community. I think that's actually a lot easier than having the legislature vote to change the lines from, smack down the middle of Vicksburg Square to around it. So that, to me, that's not as big of a deal. Doing a whole another town boundary, as crazy as that may sound to you. But just to change the one line
It makes sense.
for one building, I think they would be very, very reluctant to do that.
Okay. So a potential obstacle.
Right.
And I think it's worth having a discussion first, have a discussion with our legislators.
Yeah, I think that's how we left.
Yeah.
One of the to-dos was to be able to talk to them about
Yeah.
this very thing and how it would work. Go ahead, John.
Sorry, I think it was.
Oh, sorry.
Trying to
Sorry,
say
Neil.
something.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, big challenge and big opportunity. I don't dispute anything that Alan said about, the preservation of Vicksburg Square. It is in her historic district. The Devens Enterprise Commission, as the local historic district commission, definitely wants to see these buildings adaptively reused and preserved. It goes along with everything else with regards to housing, redevelopment of historic buildings. It's in line with our climate action plan, for adaptive reuse of existing buildings, all that embodied energy in those buildings, not to mention all the historic greatness. But I think the point is, as was just mentioned, changing a town boundary or a county boundary could be a huge obstacle, and that's a discussion we have to have with the legislatures. I'm not suggesting slowing anything up. By all means, let's trudge forward, but there are other opportunities or options. Intermunicipal agreements happen all the time. To Victor's point, surely town halls and offices are all within Devens. It can work. There's ways to work it out, and we need to sit down and set up a specific committee to address this, not just keep tying it into final jurisdiction of Devens. We're trying to, everybody agrees housing is a key priority for Vicksburg, for everybody's benefit. So, let's do it in tandem with, these discussions about jurisdiction, final jurisdiction of everything, and not necessarily intertwine the two. That we have to determine the disposition of Vicksburg right now before we redevelop everything on Vicksburg Square. I think we can do it without having to, complicate everything with figuring out boundaries, and that's the point that I think John is trying to make and that I am trying to make as well. Sorry, John, I don't want to speak for you, but...
No, that's fine, Neil. And Neil, to your point, Mr. Chairman, if I may...
Go ahead,
correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I heard the senator say. That's what Neil said. So I could be wrong. Maybe I misinterpreted, and apologies if I did, but that's what I heard.
Yep. And again, no one is suggesting that using super town meeting now to deal with Vicksburg Square is preempting the legislature's prerogative to deal with final government and permanent government and jurisdiction at Devens. No one's suggesting that. And that maybe, based on Mass Development's playbook, that's not going to happen until 2030. And I don't think we're willing to wait. Janice?
So right now, though, the big problem that we have is the zoning of Vicksburg Square. I'm not talking property lines, and I'm not talking boundaries. Just the zoning, how it's zoned, right? So we still need to kind of fix that, right? I mean, are we all in agreement that the zoning? I think we talked about making it a multi-use. I forgot what we exactly we had talked about as far as what it should be rezoned to. So we kind of work on that while asking all these other questions, because they're questions that got to be asked anyways. And so we'll just keep moving forward, asking all the questions, but I think that right now we all agree that the zoning needs to be fixed.
And there are two ways of doing that. One is super town meeting, and one is Senator Cronin's proposal.
What was his proposal again?
Change the zoning for the entire innovation and technology zone and eliminate the cap entirely. If that happens, if that legislation were to pass, Mass Development would not need super town meeting, which means they would not need input from the towns or Devens residents. They would have carte blanche to develop within the existing zoning bylaws. They would not be otherwise constrained.
Well, I think we should continue moving forward with the rezoning using super town meeting, okay? As far as the jurisdiction, we're asking the questions, and if and when we get to super town meeting about the zoning, well, we be point blank. People, we don't know the answer until 2033. You're asked a question for today. So what's, I mean, I do think, and we're on public record that it's being discussed as far as, this jurisdiction and everything, but we need to focus on what's important right now, and that will be the zone, right?
Yeah, it seemed the super town meeting would be about the zoning.
Yeah.
To Neil's point, let's figure out, is it a boundary change? Is it an
Right.
town agreement? Is it a handshake? I don't care as long as we have clarity and
Right. And
then we go to the towns with, this is what we intend to do, and what we need the town support on is the rezoning of this so it can be potentially mixed use in the way that's going to appeal to a developer who want to actually take on the project and addresses the needs we have in terms of housing portfolio and a mixture of housing portfolio. So to John and Neil, I finally kind of get what you're saying. You're like, hey, maybe you don't need the town meeting, super town meeting for the boundary piece, and I agree with you. I think that's part of what we need to do is explore, do we even need that? But we absolutely need the zoning piece. We have to get it rezoned. And that takes a super town meeting because we're not doing the alternative. Correct?
Well, except,
What did I miss?
no, except that we've been there and we've done that, and we've not been successful, unless
that's true.
Unless they know where it sits.
Unless there is some representation that
It's going to be here.
it's going to be, eventually going to be in the town of Air, subject to approval by the legislature.
Exactly, but, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't all the previous super town meetings on Vicksburg Square being handled by Mass Development, where they kind of came to like our board and said, hey, this is what we want to do.
They did,
Yeah.
yes.
And we're gonna have a public forum, and then we're gonna ask you to come, right?
They did the public and
Right,
community
right,
engagement.
right. There's your difference. There's your bigger difference. I sincerely believe that that makes a bigger difference, because
course
they
it
were
does.
driving the bus, they loaded the bus, they put the gas in the bus, they did everything. And it was simply us being notified, us being all of us going, hey, this is what we want to talk about. And we're going to go to super town meeting. No. This time, we
And when
are
was
gonna
it
do-
done as well? When was this last super town meeting on
Was it in
this?
13?
2012, 2013.
So you're talking 10 years ago, the landscape
And it
has
was also 10
dramatically
years ago.
changed.
Oh, dramatically.
Right.
And there was a whole
And right prior
different
to
set
the
of,
pandemic, they came to the boards and they said, hey, we're gonna do something with Vicksburg Square. We said, oh, okay, what? Well, we got a plan, and we're gonna come back to you, and we're gonna do a public forum. And then all of a sudden, it just fell apart.
and the mix with
When
Trinity
was-
Financial too, was not a.
no, this was even before, no, I'm talking about
Oh,
after
okay,
that. I'm
sorry,
talking
okay.
about,
Yep.
in my time. So, and then that was the end of the conversation. And when we thought that they were gonna come back, at least to the Town of Air's board, to tell us what's going on, we dropped it. Where was the communication? So here's your communication. So we're on public record that we're showing everybody that as far as this, this jurisdictional line, it is being discussed. But let's focus on the big thing that needs to be done. And all the questions and the concerns should all be put in the report that goes to the state, so that when the state gets the report, they get everything. right? Or am I too in belief of a positive?
I'd like to believe that we have more influence over the voters at Super Town Meeting than mass development.
I think we do, because nobody likes mass development.
Okay.
Let's be honest.
Mr. Chairman, can I just, I'll say, what we're discussing, there's nothing radical or dramatic or revolutionary about discussing amending that existing zoning district that was created 30 years ago. I didn't realize, by the way, it was Glenn Garber that wrote the original zoning regs and all. And and in the articles, he actually says from back then, I did it really in a rush-fast way, faster than I would have liked. It was 30 years ago, yes, their thought was innovation technology. They thought all these high-tech buildings are going to these mill buildings, and they're like, no, this wasn't it. So it's time. It is time. We're doing this in our own towns. We abolished our downtown business district 5 years ago and introduced a new form-based code district. We spent a year engaging with our community. That's how, so when we went to town meeting, we had a unanimous vote, which is, we then abolished a second zoning. So I'll cut to the chase. I'm sorry, Victor, I am. We know how to do this, and Janice is right. We know how to engage with our people, and so they can make an informed decision and do this. This is exactly what needs, and everybody knows it. There's nothing even controversial about it. It's time to update, amend that zoning for conditions now and the future, and it's good. The good things that are going to, even better than what they had proposed in '94. This is a natural evolution and progression. Any of us in this business know this. What's happening everywhere. There's nothing unusual about it. It's time to rezone it, regardless of what else happens with the rest of this.
And we're really running along on time. I think, I don't disagree with you, Alan. I like to believe that, people who show up at town meeting have open minds and appreciate everything that you've had to say. For me, I think you really need to be candid with voters at town meeting and to make it clear that it's the legislature is going to make the decision on permanent government. However, this is what is going to be the preferred alternative, is that Vicksburg Square ends up in the town of Vicksburg. And I think you can't make any representation stronger than that, and then hope that the zoning and the character of the housing falls into place. So how about, we've got to move things along. How about if we continue this conversation? Is there any point in that, or?
I think the conversation should continue.
Okay, I think what I'm hearing is that we really ought to run this by our representatives to find out how complicated it is to change town boundaries. So
yes, while also looking at the rezoning without worrying about moving that. We need to have everything moving together.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so in the interest of time for next steps for the next meeting, I don't think there's any question that, one, this should be an agenda item for further discussion. To help further shape it, one homework assignment that you had mentioned, if Neil would be willing to and look at, is how to call the process for a super town meeting not being originated by mass development. So, I mean, that's a piece of information that we need. And some of us could at least look at initially potential very just draft zoning article type of thing, just to further inform the discussion. And then, as Mike mentioned from Shirley, I think re-engaging a discussion with the legislature about the issue of the boundary. So at least have this for the next meeting with sort of those further informational tasks.
Okay. Would you be willing to work on just a small group to kind of flesh out what a super town meeting article might look like, some of the major issues? I'm happy to work with you on that too.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and somebody from Mike? Okay, and then Neil will do that. And so let's put it on the agenda. Now, how do people feel about meeting next month?
All right, so next month, if we were to do it, that would fall on December 13th. That would be the second Wednesday of December. Are we Are we good here? I don't think we have anything on the,
This space is open.
okay, this
Yep.
space is
Okay.
open, so that part's taken
Yeah.
care of. So now it's just, does everybody want to do it?
And what I can do ahead of time is survey the members and see if that works, and hopefully it does, and we'll have a quorum.
Okay.
All right,
So we'll put a placeholder for the meeting room.
Yep.
and we have under new
Happy
business.
to offer up Devens as well too, if you guys are interested.
Okay. It will be Shirley hosting next time.
Meaning
Do you
you're
want
in
to
charge
meet
of the meeting
here?
today.
Is this good, or on Devens? Or-
This is fine.
Okay, here.
You can use my office to prepare.
We'll meet here, and we, knowing that we have a backup location on Devens if we need that. Under new business, there's a letter that Jamie Eldridge, John Cronin, and Rep. Senna have sent to Secretary Howe, who is Secretary of Economic Development,
Correct.
Yes.
also Chairman
Chair
of the
Board of Directors.
Board of
Mass
Directors of
Development,
Mass Development. Who knows most about this letter? Rich, do you?
Jamie had mentioned that they were going to send it. I think it was based on
Okay.
part of our call 3 weeks ago. Jamie texted me this week and just said, hey, it'd be great if the town sent a similar letter and CC'd your legislators.
I know Jamie always likes to know that the towns are behind him whenever he does anything. So I think maybe it would be good if the three towns and Devens residents as well, and
Shouldn't the letter come from this committee? Because we're each
We could-
representing.
how do others feel about that? Is that,
Doesn't matter to me. I think if, it does the same trick, to be quite
Okay.
honest with you. If you have one letter and it has, a representative from each one of the stakeholders group, it's just as powerful as the individual.
how about if I'll draft something and circulate it for everybody to look at? And the one thing I would add to this letter, picking up on something Janet said earlier, I'm sure it was Jamie's staff who wrote it, and mentions the 400,000, not really caring where the money comes from, whether it comes from a bond issue or mass development. I would like to just add something about, maybe this isn't the right time, but getting mass development to the table is something that
Yeah.
we're our goal.
Those
Okay.
were the two things we asked on the call.
Okay.
We need dollars and we need mass development re-engaged. So
Okay.
I think that would be the only thing I would re-stress in this, but an agenda item for next time where we could look at a draft
Okay.
and sign it and get it to Secretary before the holidays of Christmas.
Okay. All right, public comment? Okay. In the way in the back. Identify yourself and,
Jim Geller, I'm a Devens resident.
Okay.
I'm Jim Geller, I'm a Devens resident, been a resident there since 2005. And I have seen a lot of action, or perhaps I should say inaction, with regards to Vicksburg Square in the time that I've been there. So the discussion that I'm hearing today I find encouraging. At the same time that I find it encouraging, I also have to sit there and ask myself what's changed. And perhaps being a little bit on the cynical side, I think what's changed is that the towns at this point have come to recognize that perhaps there's going to be some control taken away from them by the legislature, particularly with regards to the whole housing issue. And so I think that has really changed, quite frankly, what I'm hearing from elected officials in the towns. Because up to this point, the towns have not gone for the changes that would be needed to turn Vicksburg Square into housing. You've got to change the zoning, you got to change the housing cap. So I think things have fundamentally changed, and I think you've decided that you'd prefer to keep some level of control over the situation, and so therefore now you're willing to talk about it. Great. I think that's terrific. My comment, though, is if you add in this boundary issue into this discussion, you're gonna cloudy. You're gonna make things very cloudy. You're gonna make them very messy. You're gonna make it very difficult for the people, particularly people who have not supported in this past, the people of the town of Air and of Harvard. It's gonna make it very difficult for them to get their heads wrapped around why this boundary issue is so important. And so the question that I would simply ask you is given where the boundary is right now, where does most of Vicksburg Square reside? It's in Air. 90%? Well, I don't know what the percentage is. So if I'm in Air, regardless of whether you change the boundary, I already, if it comes back to me with through jurisdiction, I've already got 90% of it. And if I sit in Harvard and I say I've got 10% of it, the boundary, I think the boundary issue is just going to make things really messy, really cloudy. I think it's just going to add more confusion. And honestly, I think it'll make it more difficult to pass in a super town meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Paul, you had something?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I have several comments and suggestions. Paul Green, Town of Harvard, member of the Harvard Devens Jurisdiction Committee. First, I have a suggestion for the public comment period, which is following on how the Harvard Board of Selectmen typically handles public comment, which is to let the public have their say and don't try to respond to it in real time. Respect their willingness and ability to just lay their opinion out, listen to it. If there's something you want to follow up on, you know how to get a hold of them, right? We're not here to debate you. We're here to add our ideas. Secondly, I'd like to make a suggestion that this committee try to put together a schedule, because I think in all this discussion we've had, no one has brought up the idea of just taking a calendar and a list of tasks and writing down, here's what this group intends to do, and here's the time frame we're going to impose on ourselves as goals to try to keep ourselves focused and moving along. And I think if you were able to show that time frame and that schedule and that commitment to the legislatures and to the chairman of the legislatures, you could say, we're serious about this. We have a schedule. Here's what we're working on. And throw out the whole 10-year thing, by the way. Just forget all that. Just here's how aggressive we can be in tackling these problems. And some of you may know that I have actually tried to do this for the Harvard Committee. I have actually laid this schedule out. And I believe in 3 years, with sufficient funding at the right points in time, and I don't know what that number is, right, any more than you do, I think the citizens of these towns and the people on this committee could in fact do the study in just 3 years. And one of my concerns is that if the whole committee tries to split out issues and deal with them in the main line, that it will take longer than 3 years, right? And so I applaud the notion of forming subcommittees to do some of these specialized tasks, because I think then the main committee can continue on the primary course, which I see as, let's just deal with disposition. Let's just get it out of the way, right? There's a tremendous economic benefit to the citizens of Harvard, Air, and Shirley to regain local jurisdiction. Or if it goes back and becomes its own town, there's a tremendous economic benefit to the current citizens of Devens. I'd rather have that benefit coming to the citizens than to mass development. And so I think there should be an urgency to this. Thirdly, I think that while mass development has not been at the table, the work of the HDJC has shown that they're pretty responsive to our requests. And so I would coin a term here and say we can at least get them half engaged by constantly asking them questions and to do things and to supply us with information. Mr. Minoyan earlier talked about writing them a letter, getting them to cut down the vines, things like that. Absolutely, right? asking them to bring in civil engineers and do a study of the condition of Vicksburg Square so we get some professional opinion on the state of the buildings. I think I may have mentioned this earlier. I'm an engineer by training. It's software, but it's still engineering. I'm tired of ordinary citizens saying things like the buildings are falling down. We don't actually know that, okay? We don't know how far they're gone. There's 4 buildings. Maybe some of them are, maybe they're not. Let's ask Mass Development to spend a few bucks. It's not big bucks. Have somebody come in and do the studies, right? If it turns out they're too far gone, then we don't need a super town meeting. You know, this is green fields again, to use the term we used earlier. Lastly, those buildings need mitigation. They have asbestos in them. Whose job is that? Oh, that's the Army. Well, we know how to find them too, right? They're mitigating other parts of Devens. So, you know, there's a lot of things this committee can do if it lays out the task, if it puts a time frame, if it assigns people to do them, and if it meets more often than 4 times a year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Over here?
Hello, I'm Regina Todd. I'm a resident of Devens. And first thing I would like to do is provide this group with a suggestion. From a few meetings that I've been in, this is no exception. There have been major topics that have been brought up, somewhat spur of the moment without anyone knowing what the details of the discussion were going to be. And there seems to be in some meetings an expectation that there's an immediate decision, as was, I think, sought today, but now tabled for additional discussion. I would suggest that discussion points are brought in and that people have appropriate time to be able to go back to their constituents and have the necessary discussions, as what we will do after this meeting with the residents, so that there's not just an impromptu, here's the proposal, and let's take a vote. So for any major topics, anything that's new, I advocate strongly that there either be pre-work so that people are prepared to come into the meeting, or that you allow the time after this meeting. The second thing is, I think that from a Vicksburg Square perspective, we all know what the history is. We all know that it's been 30 some odd years that it's been languishing. We know that there have been 3 failed votes involving Vicksburg Square, and there was a 4th that didn't even go to a vote. I am honestly glad to see that the towns are now rallying around Vicksburg Square. I just think it's extremely unfortunate that since 2021, the DEC at the time was pushing hard for a decision on Vicksburg Square. And unfortunately, as publicly documented in many meeting minutes, it is known that the HDJC has repeatedly expressed through meetings and meeting minutes that the point of leverage for accelerating jurisdiction was using Vicksburg Square. And I want to make that a matter of public record. It is documented in many meeting minutes and comments that people have made. And I think that we all need to be honest with each other in our dealings going forward. I am also aware that the proposal you just put forth today in regards to town boundaries was discussed behind the scenes, both in HDJC and between the towns, and HDJC and other town representatives had stated that jurisdiction of Vicksburg Square was essentially a non-starter, that it probably couldn't happen, but that was what was being proposed to be able to accelerate the jurisdiction schedule. And I think that those types of things that you can only find out either attending meetings or reading meeting minutes is not being very transparent. And I think that now that we have a residents committee that's standing up and that's truly engaged, we would like to claim our seat at the table as a full stakeholder participant and be parts of these other discussions that happen behind the scenes and that rise to the level of the legislators. So I thank you for that.
Any other comments? Janice?
I'm a little confused as to the behind-the-scenes conversation. I don't know what you mean by that, the behind-the-scenes.
That there were discussions in regards to carving,
talking about the phone
carving out of Vicksburg Square, and then the trickle-down discussions of, well, this won't fly because we carve out Vicksburg Square, then someone's going to want to carve out this, and someone's going to want to carve out that, and in the end, you've made the jurisdiction decision.
So I don't know who's been doing these behind the scenes, so I just want to point out, because I don't know if you're aware, I've certainly talked about it in all the time I've been a part of this committee.
Yep.
So I'm not sure what,
No,
you know,
it's,
because I actually like doing it in front of everybody.
yep,
Because good or bad, you know, I can come across good or bad some days, but at least I've done it in front of you. So, I honestly am just confused by that.
that's
But
fine.
I agree, if something's going on that nobody knows about, then that's bad.
we
So I
just want to have an equal seat at the table, and we want to be transparent, and want you to be transparent with us. Thank you.
Okay. Items for our next agenda, we'll get an RFEI update. For Vicksburg Square, we'll get hopefully a memo from Neil on the super town meeting process. Robert and I will work on some kind of first pass at an article. And I will draft a letter from this committee to Secretary Howe.
Correct.
Anything else that we need to put on the agenda? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Without objection, we are adjourned.